The first thing that changed wasn't what anyone said. It was what they stopped saying. 1 second. The dining room of Manhattan's most expensive restaurant hummed with the particular music of money. Crystal touching crystal, low laughter that cost 6 figures to earn. The next second, silence dropped like a sheet over a body. I stood near table 12, holding a leather check presenter that suddenly felt heavier than it should, watching a room full of billionaires remember they were mortal. He hadn't even spoken yet. The old man, he just sat down in a chair that seemed to bow under the weight of something invisible, something the rest of us could only feel pressing against our chests. His suit was simple, dark, cut with the kind of precision that doesn't need logos. His face wasn't angry, which somehow made it worse. Anger you can predict. This was something older, quieter, certain. 2 men in matching suits positioned themselves without being told. One near the entrance, one by the bar. They didn't scan the room like security. They assessed it like appraisers, deciding what everything was worth, including the people. The floor manager hissed past me, barely moving his lips. "Stay away from that table." I nodded the way I always did. The way invisible people nod. Then the server assigned to them made his mistake. It wasn't dramatic. No spilled wine. No broken glass. He just did what confident men always do, around power they don't understand. He spoke first. "Gentlemen, welcome. Can I start you?" The old man lifted his eyes. The server's voice died in his throat, like someone had reached in and pulled the plug. I watched his professional smile collapse into something smaller, more honest. Not quite fear. More like sudden understanding. Like he'd just remembered a rule that had been written in his bones his whole life, and he'd somehow forgotten until this exact moment. The old man didn't raise his voice, didn't correct him, didn't even move. He just waited. In that pause, the entire table shifted. The men around him didn't turn their heads, but their attention sharpened like knives being drawn from sheaths. It was the kind of stillness you feel right before lightning strikes, when the air itself holds its breath. The server tried to recover. "My apologies. My name is... Who taught you to greet a man that way?" The old man's English was clean, almost gentle, but the words landed like a door slamming shut. I should have stayed in the back. I should have done what I'd spent 3 years perfecting. Fade into the wallpaper, become part of the furniture, survive by being forgettable. But my body moved before my brain could stop it. I stepped forward and placed the check presenter on the edge of the table. Not in front of him, not in front of anyone. Just close enough to be an offering, as if I'd been invited to make one. The old man's eyes found mine. He didn't look me up and down, didn't study my uniform or my name tag or any of the details that usually define us to people like him. He looked directly into my face like he was searching for something behind it, something he wasn't sure he'd find. "Not you," the floor manager whispered behind me, panicked. "Jesus Christ, not you." I ignored him. Because in that moment, I stopped being the girl who kept her head down and her voice quiet. I became my grandmother's granddaughter again. The child who'd learned certain words in a narrow apartment above a bakery that always smelled like burnt sugar and Sunday grief. I opened my mouth and spoke in a voice that didn't belong in this restaurant, didn't belong in this city, didn't belong to the person I'd spent years pretending to be. "Good evening, Zio." Uncle, not sir, not Mr. Moretti or whatever name he used in rooms like this. Zio. The word my grandmother had taught me to use for men who held your life in their hands and pretended it was a favor. The air in the room changed instantly, not louder, colder. One of the men beside the old man tensed, his jaw tightening, his eyes sliding toward his boss for permission to react. The old man raised one finger without looking away from my face. Everyone froze. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full, pressurized, like something was being held back that wanted very badly to be released. "Say it again," the old man said. My heart was trying to break through my ribs, but my hands stayed steady. They always did. I'd learned that young, the same way other children learn to swim. "Good evening, Zio." He leaned forward, just an inch, but it felt like the whole room tilted with him. "Only one person in this city ever called me that," he said softly. "And she's been dead for 3 years." My throat went dry, but I didn't look away. Couldn't, because I knew what came next. In conversations like this, you either lie and hope they don't check, or you tell the truth and hope they let you live with it. I chose the truth. The dangerous one. I heard her say it. I told him. In the hospice ward at St. Vincent's, when she thought no one was listening. Before this gets any darker, subscribe if you haven't already. Thousands of people are following this story in real time, and I want to know where you're watching from. Drop your location below. Let's see how far this reaches. Something behind the old man's eyes shifted. Not softness, not warmth. Something closer to recognition. The kind that feels like a verdict being read. He studied my face for a long moment, and I knew he was comparing me to a memory he'd tried to bury, aligning my features with someone else's, searching for proof. "What's your name?" he asked. The floor manager opened his mouth like he was going to answer for me, then apparently remembered he wanted to keep breathing. "Mara," I said. The old man nodded slowly, like I'd just confirmed something he'd already suspected. "And your mother?" The question hit me in the chest. Not casual, not kind. A test. A hook. The kind of question that comes with consequences, no matter how you answer it. "Rena," I whispered. "She worked nights at St. Vincent's, hospice wing." The old man went completely still. Somewhere behind me, a chair scraped against the floor and stopped, like even the furniture had been corrected. "Hospice," he repeated, so quietly I almost didn't hear him. "So you saw her." I didn't ask who. We both knew. I saw the small woman with the rosary beads and the tired eyes, who'd smiled at me one last time, and told me in a voice like breaking glass, that certain families don't let you leave clean, even when you've done everything right. "Yes," I said. His gaze dropped to my collar, where a small silver medal hung on a thin chain. Not jewelry. A relic. Cheap metal worn smooth by fingers, rubbing it during prayers that never quite worked. He reached toward it, stopped himself, then pulled his hand back as if touching it would confirm something he wasn't ready to know for certain. "That medal," he said. "Where did you get it?" The ache in my throat wasn't fear anymore. It was older than that. Deeper. "She gave it to me," I said, "the night she couldn't speak anymore." The old man's eyes narrowed, but not at me. At the space between us, like he could see the hospital corridor in his mind. "Smell the disinfectant. Feel the weight of what he'd lost there." "What did she tell you?" he asked. I shouldn't answer. Not here. Not with witnesses in tailored suits and hunger in their eyes. Not in a room that listened like a courtroom and remembered like a ledger. But he was already inside the truth. I could feel it. There was no clean exit from this moment. No polite way to walk it back. "She said," I began, and my voice cracked once before I could steady it. "She said you would recognize the way I speak. And if you did," I swallowed. It meant I was out of time. The old man held my stare for a long moment. Then, softly, almost too quietly for anyone else to hear. For years, I wondered if she ever forgave me. I didn't answer, because forgiveness was too simple a word for what my mother had carried. Too clean. The man beside him shifted his weight. Not impatient. Concerned. Like this conversation was pulling his boss into a place no one wanted him to go. The old man exhaled slowly, deliberately, like he was deciding something. Then he did something that made the entire room tense all over again. He smiled. Barely. Not warmth, not kindness. More like a man accepting that something buried had crawled back to the surface. And now he had to deal with it. "Come closer," he said. I didn't move. His eyes registered my hesitation immediately. "Understood it. You think stepping closer makes you less invisible," he said. "But you've already been seen." The words landed in my chest like stones. I stood there in my too big uniform, still holding a check presenter that suddenly felt like a prop in someone else's play, and I understood with perfect, terrible clarity what he meant. Being invisible had been my armor, my strategy, my survival. But recognition doesn't ask permission. It doesn't care about the life you've built or the person you've tried to become. It reaches into your past and drags it into the present, and suddenly you're standing in a room full of strangers who know exactly who you are. Or worse, who you were always going to be. Because invisibility only works until someone remembers your face. And in that moment, as the old man looked at me with something close to regret, I realized my mother had known this day would come. She'd tried to prevent it, tried to hide me, tried to make me into someone forgettable. But some promises don't hold. Some histories don't stay buried. And some words, once spoken, can't be taken back. The old man gestured to the empty chair across from him. It wasn't a request. I sat. The leather was still warm from whoever had been sitting there before. Probably someone who'd been quietly asked to leave the moment I'd opened my mouth. The table between us held a single glass of water, untouched, and a folded white napkin that looked like it had been placed with surgical precision. "Your mother," he said, not asking, just opening the door to a conversation I'd spent years trying to avoid. Rena worked the night shift, 12-hour rotations. She took the cases no one else wanted. I kept my hands flat on my thighs where he couldn't see them shake. "You knew her schedule. I knew everything about her," he said simply. "Where she bought her groceries. Which subway line she took home. The school you attended until you were 16. He paused, letting that settle. "The hospital chapel she visited every Sunday, even though she stopped believing in God years before." My chest tightened. "You were watching us. I was protecting you." The word landed wrong. Too clean. Too much like kindness, when I knew it was something else entirely. From what? I asked. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he reached into his jacket and withdrew something small. Something I recognized before he even placed it on the table between us. A keycard. Faded blue plastic with St. Vincent's logo barely visible. Expired years ago. I kept this, he said, because it was the last thing she touched before she stopped being able to move her hands. I stared at it, my throat closing. Your mother and I had an agreement, he continued, his voice soft in a way that made it worse, not better. She would disappear. You would disappear. And in exchange, certain people would forget you ever existed. What people? His eyes flicked to the man standing behind him, the one who'd tensed when I first spoke. A silent instruction passed between them. The man stepped back, just far enough to give us the illusion of privacy. The kind of people, the old man said, who don't forgive debts, even ones they never wanted in the first place. I felt something cold crawl up my spine. My mother didn't owe anyone anything. No, he agreed. But my sister did. The words hit me like a slap. Sister. So that was it. That was the connection I'd felt hovering in the air. The thing my mother had never said out loud but had taught me anyway through silence and careful distances and a single word I should never have been taught at all. She told you to call me Zio, he said, reading my face. Didn't she? I nodded, not trusting my voice. She told you, he continued, because she knew that if you ever met me, if I ever saw your face or heard how you speak, I would know. And if I knew, he leaned back, something like regret crossing his features. Then the protection would break. What protection? The kind that requires you to stay invisible, he said. The kind that keeps you alive as long as no one remembers your name. My pulse hammered in my ears. Why are you telling me this? Because yesterday, he said quietly, someone asked about you. The room seemed to tilt. Who? He didn't answer. Instead, he stood slowly, the way men do when they've already made a decision and don't need your input to execute it. Don't go home tonight, Mara, he said, his voice gentle in a way that made my stomach drop. Don't go anywhere you've been before. You can't just. I can't protect you twice, he interrupted. Your mother made me promise. Once. I kept that promise for 23 years. His eyes held mine, and for the first time I saw something other than power in them. I saw exhaustion, but promises only work when both sides stay quiet. He turned to leave, then paused. She never told you, did she? What she gave up to keep you safe. I shook my head. The old man's expression shifted into something I couldn't read. Not pity. Not quite sorrow. Then you should ask yourself, he said softly, why someone who loved you that much would teach you a word that could get you killed. He walked away, his men falling into formation around him like a closing fist. And I sat there, alone, at a table that didn't belong to me, in a restaurant that suddenly felt like a cage, holding a truth I didn't want. My mother hadn't been protecting me by teaching me that word. She'd been preparing me. For what? I didn't know yet. But the old man's warning echoed in my head, like a countdown I couldn't stop. Someone asked about you. And the worst part, the part that made my hands finally start to shake, was that I had no idea who else had been waiting for me to become visible. I didn't go home. I went to the only place I knew the old man's people wouldn't follow me immediately. A 24-hour diner in Hell's Kitchen, where the fluorescent lights hummed too loud and the coffee tasted like someone's regret. I sat in a booth near the back, my phone face down on the table, and tried to remember the rules my mother had taught me. Don't use your real name unless you have to. Don't make friends who ask questions. Don't ever tell anyone where you're really from. I used to think she was paranoid, traumatized, maybe, by something that had happened before I was born. Some violence she'd witnessed or escaped. It made sense at the time. A single mother raising a daughter in a city that ate people alive. Of course she'd be careful. Of course she'd teach me to be invisible. But sitting in that diner, staring at my cold coffee, I understood something I'd been too young to see before. My mother hadn't been teaching me survival skills. She'd been teaching me how to disappear. There's a difference. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I stared at it for 3 long seconds before I picked it up. Mara. The voice was younger than the old man's, smoother. But it carried the same weight. My father asked me to make sure you're safe. I didn't ask how he got my number. I'm fine. No, he said, not unkind, just factual. You're not. You're sitting in a diner on 10th Avenue, pretending you have options. My blood went cold. Are you watching me? Not me, he said. But if I know where you are, so do they. Who's they? A pause. Not hesitation. Calculation. The people who asked about you yesterday, he said. The ones my father didn't want to name in public. Another pause. The Sokolovs. The name meant nothing to me, but the way he said it, careful, like handling glass, told me everything I needed to know. Russian, I said. Brighton Beach. Old agreements. Older grudges. His voice dropped lower. Your mother's disappearance was part of a truce. You were the condition. As long as you stayed invisible, both sides stayed quiet. And now someone broke the silence. I closed my eyes, trying to slow my heart rate, trying to think through the panic. Your father said my mother gave something up. What was it? The line went quiet for so long I thought he'd hung up. Her name, he said finally. Her real one, the one that mattered. I didn't understand. And he must have known, because he continued without me asking. My aunt, my father's sister, married a man named Petrov. Alexei Petrov. He was Sokolov's second in command before he was killed in a warehouse fire 20 years ago. He exhaled slowly. Your mother was the nurse who documented his death. She signed the papers. She made it official. My stomach dropped. She lied. She testified. He corrected. Under oath. She said he died in the fire. The family collected insurance. The Sokolovs accepted his death. The truce held. But he didn't die. No, he said quietly. He didn't. The pieces fell into place with a sickening clarity. And if I exist, I said slowly, if people know who my mother was, if they start asking questions, then the truce unravels, he finished. And everyone who benefited from his death becomes a target. I opened my eyes and stared at my reflection in the diner window. I looked small, ordinary, forgettable, everything my mother had tried to make me. So what am I supposed to do? I asked. Disappear again? You can't disappear now, he said. Not after tonight. Too many people heard you, saw you. My father's move bought you time, not safety. Then what? You accept protection. There it was. The offer that wasn't really an offer. And if I don't? The silence on the other end was answer enough. Where are you? I asked. My voice steadier than I felt. Outside. I looked up. Through the diner window, I saw a black car idling at the curb. The back door opened. Get in, Mara, he said, still on the phone, even though I could see him now. Tall, dark suit. His father's eyes without the weight of decades behind them. Or spend the rest of the night wondering who else knows where you are. I stood slowly, left money on the table I didn't owe, and walked toward the door. My mother had spent 23 years keeping me hidden, and I'd destroyed it all with a single word. But as I reached for the car door, one thought cut through the fear. My mother had taught me that word, knowing I might use it someday. Which meant she'd known, eventually, the promise would fail. The question I couldn't answer, the one that made my hand freeze on the door handle, was whether she'd been preparing me to survive what came next, or preparing me to finish something she'd started. The apartment they took me to wasn't a safe house. It was a museum of someone else's life. Hardwood floors that had been refinished too many times. Furniture that looked expensive but felt temporary, like it had been staged for a showing that never happened. Windows that faced a courtyard instead of the street. Strategic, I realized, not aesthetic. Vincenzo closed the door behind us and set 2 bags on the kitchen counter. Groceries I hadn't asked for. Clothes in my size I hadn't packed. How long have you been planning this? I asked. 3 days, he said. Since the Sokolovs started asking questions. Your father knew before you spoke to him? Yes. He started unpacking the bags with movements that were too practiced, too calm. He knew. He just didn't know if you were the problem or the solution. And now, he paused, holding a carton of eggs like he'd forgotten what he was doing. Now you're both. I sat on the edge of the couch that didn't feel like mine, and watched him move through the kitchen like he'd been here before. Maybe he had. Maybe this apartment was where they put everyone who needed to disappear. You do this often? I asked. Relocate people? Sometimes. He didn't look at me. Usually they're grateful. I didn't say I wasn't grateful. You didn't have to. He finally turned, leaning against the counter. You have the same look my mother had. Like being saved is just another kind of trap. The mention of his mother landed differently than I expected. Softer. Your aunt, I said, correcting myself. Your father's sister, Lucia. He said her name carefully, like it still hurt. She raised me after my mother died. She was the only person who ever made my father laugh. He crossed his arms, and your mother watched her die in a hospice bed, holding a secret that could have saved her if she'd just told the truth. The accusation hung in the air between us. My mother didn't kill her, I said quietly. No, he agreed, but she didn't save her either. I wanted to defend her, to explain that whatever choice she'd made it to protect me. But I didn't know if that was true. I didn't know anything anymore, except that the people who were supposed to protect me kept talking about my mother like she'd been part of something I was only now inheriting. Vincenzo moved to the window, checking the street below out of habit. She stayed here once, he said. Your mother, 24 years ago. Same apartment, same arrangement. My chest tightened. She was hiding too. She was deciding, he corrected. My father gave her the same choice he's giving you. Protection. A new name. A life where the past couldn't find her. He glanced back at me. She chose differently than he wanted. She left. She stayed invisible, he said. But she didn't stay close. My father respected that. He kept his distance. He kept his promise. His jaw tightened. Until you opened your mouth in a room full of witnesses and reminded everyone she existed. The guilt settled over me like a weight. I didn't know. That's what makes it worse, he said. But his voice wasn't cruel. Just tired. You did exactly what she tried to prevent, and you didn't even know you were doing it. He sat down across from me, close enough that I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. The kind that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from carrying things too heavy to put down. Why are you helping me? I asked. Because my father asked me to. That's not a reason. He looked at me for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. Something I recognized because I felt it too. Because I know what it's like, he said quietly, to inherit a life you never chose. The honesty in his voice cracked something open in my chest. Do you resent him? I asked. Your father. Every day. He leaned back, his eyes still on mine, and I'd still take a bullet for him. That's what family does. It traps you with love. I understood that, more than I wanted to. We sat in silence for a while. The kind that doesn't need filling. Outside, the city hummed with lives that didn't know we existed. People going home to apartments they chose. Jobs they could quit. Futures they could plan. Did you love her? I asked suddenly. Your aunt. More than my own mother, he said. She was the only one who treated me like a person, instead of an investment. I'm sorry. Don't be, he said. Just don't waste the choice she died protecting. He stood, heading toward the door. Where are you going? Nowhere, he said. But you should sleep. Tomorrow my father wants to talk to you. Really talk. About what? Vincenzo paused at the door, his hand on the handle. About why your mother gave you that medal, he said, and what she expected you to do with it. He left before I could ask what he meant. I sat alone in the apartment that wasn't mine, wearing clothes someone else had chosen, protected by men I didn't trust. And I realized the worst part wasn't the danger. It was that Vincenzo had looked at me the way I'd been looking at him, like we were both prisoners pretending to be guards. Like maybe love could exist here. And that terrified me more than anything else, because if I let myself care about him, I'd never leave. And something told me that was exactly what his father was counting on. I didn't sleep. Instead, I searched the apartment the way my mother had taught me to search unfamiliar places, quietly, methodically, looking for the things people forget to hide. I found nothing, no documents, no photographs, just furniture and silence, and the feeling that someone had already swept this place clean of anything that mattered. At dawn, Vincenzo returned with coffee and a small leather folder I recognized immediately. My mother's handwriting on the tab. Where did you get that? My voice came out harder than I intended. My father kept it, he said, setting it on the table between us. He said you'd ask for it eventually. I didn't ask. You were going to. He was right, and I hated that he knew. I opened the folder with hands that wanted to shake but didn't. Inside, hospital intake forms, a photocopy of a death certificate, and a sealed envelope with my name written in ink that had faded to brown. She wrote this the week before she died, Vincenzo said quietly. She gave it to my father, made him promise not to give it to you unless I was already in danger. I finished. He nodded. I broke the seal. The letter inside was short. My mother had never wasted words. Mara, if you're reading this, it means I failed to keep you hidden. I'm sorry. Not for what I did, but for what it cost you. 24 years ago, I signed a death certificate for a man named Alexei Petrov. I testified under oath that he died in a warehouse fire. I lied. He was alive. Barely. Burns over 60% of his body. He begged me to let him die. His family begged me to save him. I did neither. I documented his death, collected the evidence, and walked away. In exchange, Salvatore promised that you, the child I was carrying, the daughter I hadn't told anyone about, would be protected. Hidden. Free. I thought I was buying you a normal life. But Alexei survived anyway. He healed. He disappeared. And the lie I told became a foundation everyone built their peace on. If you're reading this, the foundation cracked. The medal I gave you isn't a relic. It's a key. St. Vincent's keeps records in the old archive, floor B2. Medical files they're legally required to hold for 30 years but practically never check. Alexei Petrov's real file is there. The one that proves he lived. The one that proves I lied. I'm not asking you to use it. I'm giving you the choice I never had. The men protecting you aren't good men, Mara. But they're honest about what they are. That's more than most people can say. Whatever you choose, know that I would make the same choice again. You were always worth the lie. I read it twice. Then a third time. trying to find something between the lines that would make it hurt less. It didn't. Vincenzo sat across from me, watching my face with an expression I couldn't read. "You knew," I said. "Not a question, parts of it." He didn't look away. "My father told me your mother had information that could restart the war. He didn't tell me she'd given you the way to find it. And you didn't think to mention that? I thought," he said carefully, "that if you didn't know, you'd be safer." Safer. I laughed, and it came out bitter. "Everyone keeps using that word like it means something. It does mean something," he said. "It means alive." I stood, needing to move, needing to put distance between myself and the letter that had just rewritten my entire childhood. "My mother died believing she'd protected me," I said. "She spent her whole life hiding me, teaching me to be invisible. And for what? So I could end up here anyway? So I could be someone else's leverage?" "She gave you a choice," Vincenzo said. "That letter, that's not protection. That's a weapon. I don't want a weapon." "Then what do you want?" I turned to face him, and the anger that had been building since I sat at that table with his father finally found its target. "I want to know if any of this was real," I said. "You, this apartment, the concern, or am I just another problem your father is managing?" Vincenzo stood slowly, and for the first time since I'd met him, I saw something crack in his composure. "You think I'm here because he told me to be?" "I think," I said, "that everything in your life is because he told you to. Just like everything in mine was, because my mother decided it. That's not fair." "None of this is fair," I said. "That's the point." He crossed the space between us, close enough that I could see the tension in his jaw, the exhaustion in his eyes. "I'm here," he said quietly, "because I know what it's like to lose someone who is trying to protect you. And I know what it's like to inherit their mistakes." He paused. "And because when I look at you, I don't see a problem. I see someone who deserves better than this." The honesty in his voice disarmed me. "Your father failed to save her," I said, softer now. "Your aunt," he told me himself. "He did," Vincenzo agreed. "And he's spent every day since trying to make sure he doesn't fail you too. By trapping me, by keeping you alive long enough to choose." He held my gaze. "That letter gives you leverage, Mara. You can use it to buy your freedom. Or you can destroy it and stay hidden." "And what would you do?" "I'd burn it," he said without hesitation. "But I'm not brave enough to want freedom more than I want family." The confession hung between us. "Is that what you think I am?" I asked. "Brave, I think," he said. "You're about to find out." A knock at the door shattered the moment. Vincenzo's hand went to his jacket instinctively, and I saw the outline of something I'd pretended not to notice before. He opened the door carefully. One of his father's men stood in the hallway, expressionless. "He wants to see her," the man said. "Now." Vincenzo looked back at me, and I saw the answer in his eyes before I asked the question. "What happened?" "The Sokolovs," the man said. "They sent a message." My stomach dropped. "What kind of message?" The man's expression didn't change, but his voice did. "The kind written in blood." Vincenzo turned to me, and I saw something in his face I hadn't seen before. Fear, not for himself. "For me, Mara," he said quietly. "They know about the file." The message had been delivered to the restaurant, not the gilded dining room where I'd spoken to the old man. The kitchen, where the staff would find it first, where panic would spread fastest. A photograph, black and white, high resolution, me, standing at that table, the exact moment I'd said the word that changed everything. On the back, written in careful block letters, "We remember Rena too." Vincenzo drove in silence. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and twice he checked the rearview mirror with the kind of focus that told me we were being followed. Or, he wished we were so he'd have something concrete to fight. "They're not going to stop," I said. "My father will handle it." "By hiding me somewhere else? Another apartment? Another city? Another lie?" He didn't answer, which was answer enough. "Pull over," I said. "Mara, pull over." He did, jerking the car to the curb on a street I didn't recognize. Residential, quiet. The kind of place where people lived normal lives behind doors that locked from the inside, not the outside. I turned to face him. "Your father kept my mother's secret for 23 years, I said. "And it didn't save her. It didn't save your aunt. It just delayed the cost. So what are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything." I reached for the door handle. "I'm deciding." His hand caught my wrist. Not hard. Desperate. "Don't do this. You said I had a choice," I reminded him. "Use the file, or destroy it. Stay hidden, or..." I didn't mean choose suicide. "Neither did my mother," I said. "But she gave me the file anyway. Which means she knew hiding wasn't enough." I pulled free and stepped out of the car before he could stop me. He followed, catching up in 3 strides. "Where are you going?" "St. Vincent's," I said. "Floor B2, to get what my mother left me." That's exactly what they expect you to do. Good, I said. Then they'll know where to find me. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed immediately by panic. You're using yourself as bait. I'm refusing to be prey, I corrected. There's a difference. He stepped in front of me, blocking my path. This isn't courage, Mara. It's grief, and it's gonna get you killed. Maybe, I said. But at least it'll be my choice. Something in my voice must have convinced him I wasn't bluffing, because his expression shifted from panic to resignation. My father will never allow this. Then don't tell him until it's too late. For a long moment, we stood on that quiet street, the city moving around us like we were stones in a river. If you do this, Vincenzo said quietly, there's no taking it back. The Sokolovs will react. My father will have to choose between protecting you and protecting the peace. And you? He stopped, his jaw tight. You'll never be invisible again. I was never invisible, I said. I was just waiting to be seen. He stared at me like he was memorizing my face. Like he already knew how this ended. I'll drive you, he said finally. You don't have to. Yes, he said, his voice rough. I do. The hospital archive was exactly where my mother said it would be. Floor B2, behind a door marked records. Authorized personnel only. The lock was old enough that Vincenzo didn't need tools, just patience and hands that had clearly done this before. Inside, the air smelled like dust and formaldehyde, and decades of secrets no one had bothered to digitize. I found the file in 12 minutes. Petrov, Alexei. Date of death, April 3rd, 2001. Except the file was thick. Too thick for someone who died on intake. I opened it. Treatment logs, skin grafts, pain management protocols, discharge planning. He'd been alive for 6 weeks after my mother signed his death certificate. And then, on the last page, in handwriting I didn't recognize, patient transferred to private care. Family request. No further documentation required. Private care. Which meant someone had taken him. Hidden him. Let the world believe he was dead, while he healed somewhere the Sokolovs couldn't find him. Mara. Vincenzo's voice was tight. We need to go, now. I looked up. He was at the door, his phone pressed to his ear, his face pale. What happened? My father just got a call, he said. The Sokolovs know you're here. My pulse spiked. How? Because someone told them. His eyes met mine. Someone inside. The implications hit me like cold water. Your father has a leak. Or, Vincenzo said quietly, he's deciding you're not worth the war. I stared at him, and for the first time, I saw fear that wasn't for me. It was of what his father might choose. I grabbed the file and walked toward him. Then we make sure he doesn't get to choose, I said. What are you talking about? I pulled out my phone, opened the camera, and started photographing every page of the file, every signature, every date, every piece of evidence that proved Alexei Petrov had survived. If your father won't use this to protect me, I said, my voice steady even though my hands weren't, then I'll use it to protect myself. You're going to release it? I'm going to make sure that if anything happens to me, the truth goes public. I met his eyes. The Sokolovs want me dead, because I'm a threat. Your father wants me hidden, because I'm a liability. But if the file is already out there, if the truth is already known, then I'm neither. You're also not safe. I was never safe, I said. But at least this way I'm honest. Vincenzo stared at me for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. Send it to me too, he said. If they come for you, they'll come for the file. But if we both have it, then it's not about me anymore, I finished. I sent the photos to 3 email addresses. His, mine, and one I'd set up years ago that I'd never told anyone about. Insurance, the kind my mother had tried to give me. We left the archive and walked back through the hospital corridors that still smelled like grief and antiseptic. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. Mara Rossi. The voice was accented, Russian, cold. You've made a very stupid choice. My heart hammered, but my voice stayed level. Then you know what I have. We know what you think you have, the voice said. But files can be destroyed, and so can the people who carry them. Not if they're already uploaded, I said. Not if they're already sent. Silence on the other end. Then, quietly. You're bluffing. Try me. The line went dead. Vincenzo was staring at me, his face unreadable. What did you just do? I stopped hiding, I said. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I heard my mother's voice. Whatever you choose, know that I would make the same choice again. I just hoped I'd live long enough to understand if she'd meant it as encouragement. Or warning. They came for us at the apartment. Not the Sokolovs. Not directly. That would have been cleaner. They sent someone we were supposed to trust. Julian, the server from the restaurant. The one who'd made the first mistake. The one who should have been fired. should have disappeared into the city's endless supply of replaceable people. Instead, he knocked on the door at 11:30 with a bottle of wine and an apology in his eyes. Vincenzo checked the peephole, tensed, then looked at me. "Stay in the bedroom," he said. "Who is it? Someone who shouldn't know where we are." He opened the door with his hand inside his jacket. Julian stood in the hallway, looking smaller than I remembered, his uniform shirt untucked, his face pale. "I'm sorry," Julian said immediately. "They have my sister." That's all it took. 4 words. And I understood. The Sokolovs hadn't come for me directly, because they didn't need to. They just needed to find someone who loved something more than they feared dying. "Where is she?" Vincenzo asked, his voice flat. "Brooklyn, a warehouse off Atlantic." Julian's hands shook. "They said if I brought them Mara, they'd let her go. They said," his voice cracked, "they said she's 14. She doesn't know anything. She's just leverage." Vincenzo finished. Julian nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I didn't want to. I swear. I didn't. But you did." Vincenzo's gun was out now, not pointed at Julian, just visible. "You led them here. They're already here," Julian whispered. "They've been here since you arrived." The words landed like a physical blow. Vincenzo grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the back of the apartment. "Fire escape, now." But before we reached the window, the front door exploded inward. Not kicked. Blown. The kind of precision that comes with shaped charges, and people who've done this before. 3 men entered, tactical gear, no faces, just efficiency. Vincenzo fired twice. 1 man went down. The others didn't slow. "Run!" he shouted at me. I ran. Through the bedroom, through the window, onto the fire escape that overlooked the courtyard I thought was strategic, and now understood was a trap. Enclosed. Monitored. Perfect for containment. I made it down 2 flights before I heard the gunshot behind me. Not the sharp crack of Vincenzo's pistol. Something heavier. Final. I stopped. Every instinct my mother had drilled into me screamed to keep moving, to survive, to let him be the cost of my escape. But I couldn't. I climbed back up. The bedroom was empty. Just broken glass and the smell of gunpowder and silence that felt wrong. I found Vincenzo in the hallway, leaning against the wall, his hand pressed to his side where blood was spreading too fast. Julian was on the floor, not moving. The tactical team was gone. "They left," Vincenzo said through gritted teeth. "They got what they wanted." "What are you talking about?" "They didn't take me. They didn't need to." He slid down the wall, his breathing shallow. "They proved you're not worth protecting. That anyone close to you becomes a target." Understanding crashed over me. This was a message. "For my father," Vincenzo said. "Choose the peace, or choose the girl." I dropped to my knees beside him, pressing my hands over his to slow the bleeding. "We need to call." "He already knows," Vincenzo interrupted. "He's known since the second they breached the door. He has cameras, alerts. He knows everything." "Then why isn't he?" "Because he's deciding," Vincenzo said, and something in his voice broke. "Same decision he made with my aunt. Same decision your mother forced him into. Save one person, or save everyone." My hands were shaking now, slick with his blood. "You chose me," I said. "You stayed." I did. He smiled. And it was sad and certain. "Which means he'll choose the peace." "No." "Mara." He caught my wrist with his free hand. "You need to leave, now, before he decides keeping you alive means losing everything else." "I'm not leaving you. Then you'll die here," he said. "And it won't matter. Julian's sister is already dead. They killed her hours ago. This was always about proving you're toxic." The words hit me harder than the gunshot. "How do you know?" "Because it's what I would do," he said quietly. "If I wanted to turn a father against his own instincts." Sirens wailed in the distance. "Too far. Too late. Go," Vincenzo said. "Please." I wanted to argue. Wanted to stay. Wanted to prove that love wasn't just another word for leverage. But his eyes told me the truth. If I stayed, he died for nothing. If I left, maybe he died for something. I pressed my forehead to his, just once, feeling his breath against my skin. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "Don't be," he said. "Just live." I ran, down the fire escape, through the courtyard, into the streets, where I was just another person fleeing something they couldn't name. Behind me, the sirens grew louder. And somewhere in the distance, I imagined I could hear the old man making his choice. The same choice he'd made before. The same choice that had killed his sister and trapped my mother. And now, would either save or destroy the man I'd just left bleeding in a hallway. I made it 3 blocks before I realized I was still holding my phone. One unread message. From Vincenzo, sent 2 minutes ago, while I was kneeling beside him. "Floor B2. There's more you didn't see." Bed 7. Ask for Rosa. I stared at the screen, my breath coming in gasps, and understood. He'd known this was coming. Known before Julian knocked. Known before we even left the hospital. And he'd sent me back anyway. Not to save me. To finish what my mother started. The question I couldn't answer, the one that made my hands go numb and my vision narrow, was whether anyone had survived long enough for it to matter. I went back to St. Vincent's at 3 in the morning, when the hospital was staffed by people too tired to ask questions. Floor B2, bed 7. There was no bed 7 in the archive, but there was a bed 7 in the hospice wing. The same wing where my mother had worked, where she'd watched the old man's sister die, where she'd made whatever choice had started all of this. The nurse at the station barely looked up when I walked past. I wasn't wearing scrubs, but I moved like I belonged. Another lesson from my mother. Confidence isn't about what you wear. It's about acting like you've already been given permission. Room 7 was dark, except for the blue glow of monitors. A woman lay in the bed. Old, frail, her breathing shallow and mechanical, assisted by a ventilator that clicked with rhythmic precision. I didn't recognize her face, but I recognized the chart at the foot of her bed. Petrov. Rosa. No date of birth. No emergency contact. Just a single note in the admission field. Protected care. Do not discharge. Rosa Petrov. Alexei's wife. The woman who'd watched her husband burn. Who'd begged my mother to save him. Who'd accepted his death because it was easier than accepting what he'd become. She's been here 23 years, a voice said behind me. I spun. The old man stood in the doorway. No suit tonight. Just a sweater and slacks that made him look smaller. Older. Human. You knew I'd come, I said. Vincenzo told me to expect you. He stepped into the room, moving slowly. Before they took him to surgery, my chest tightened. He's alive. For now. The old man's eyes met mine. Whether he stays that way depends on choices neither of us controls. He moved to the window, looking out at the city that never quite went dark. Rosa was the first person I failed, he said quietly. Not my sister. Her. When Alexei was burned, when your mother came to me asking what to do, I told her to let him die. He paused. I thought it would be mercy. But he lived. In a way. The old man's reflection in the glass looked older than the man himself. He lived long enough to tell Rosa the truth. That the fire wasn't an accident. That his own people wanted him dead. That the only way to save her was to become a ghost. So my mother helped him disappear. She documented his death and hid his wife, he corrected. Rosa stayed here, in this bed, in a medically induced coma no one questions because no one remembers she exists. And Alexei. He turned to face me. Alexei became someone else. Someone untouchable. My stomach dropped. He's still alive. He's still dangerous, the old man said. And he's been waiting 23 years for someone to prove his death was a lie. So he could come back. So he could reclaim what was taken from him. And I gave him that proof. You didn't give him anything he didn't already suspect. The old man's voice was gentle in a way that made it worse. Your mother knew this would happen eventually. That's why she left you the file. Not so you could expose the truth, so you could negotiate with it. I looked at Rosa's unconscious face, the machines keeping her suspended between life and death, and understood. She's leverage. She's a choice, he corrected. The same choice I gave your mother. The same choice I'm giving you. Which is, take Rosa's place, he said simply. Become the guarantee that keeps Alexei from starting a war. Marry into the family. Live under protection. Accept the inheritance you never asked for. Or walk away, he said. Let Rosa wake up. Let Alexei make his move. Let everyone who tried to protect you pay for your freedom. I stared at him, and for the first time, I saw what my mother must have seen all those years ago. Not a monster, not a savior. Just a man who'd been making impossible choices for so long he'd forgotten there was any other kind. You're asking me to sacrifice myself. I'm asking you to inherit the debt your mother couldn't pay, he said. It's not fair. It's not kind. But it's the only option that keeps everyone alive. I looked at Rosa, then at the old man, then at my own reflection in the dark window. What did my mother choose? I asked. She chose you, he said. And it cost her everything. I felt something break inside me. Not clean. Not complete. Just enough to let the truth through. I won't choose the same thing. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. Then what will you choose? I walked to Rosa's bedside and looked at the machines keeping her suspended. Looked at the chart that had erased her identity. Looked at the proof that some promises only hold because everyone agrees to keep lying. I want her awake, I said. I want her to choose. She'll choose her husband. Maybe, I said. But at least it'll be her choice, not mine, not yours, not my mother's. The old man was silent for a long time. If I do this, he said finally, Alexei will come. And he won't come alone. I know. And you'll have no protection, no family, no home to return to. I know that too. He studied my face like he was trying to understand something he'd spent decades avoiding. "Your mother was wrong about you," he said quietly. "You're not invisible. You're just patient." "Is that a compliment?" "It's a warning," he said. "Patient people are the most dangerous kind." He moved toward the door, then stopped. "Vincenzo asked me to tell you something," he said. "If you came here, if you made this choice." My throat tightened. "What?" He said. "You were right." The old man's voice was softer now, almost kind. "That survival and honesty stopped being the same thing the moment you spoke my sister's name." He left before I could respond. I stood alone in that room with a woman who'd been asleep for 23 years, and I understood what my mother had been trying to tell me. Inheritance isn't a gift. It's a debt that compounds with interest until someone finally refuses to pay. I pulled out my phone and sent a single message to the email address I'd used for insurance. "Wake her up." Then I walked out of St. Vincent's for the last time, knowing I'd just set something in motion I couldn't control. But at least it was mine. And somewhere in the city, Alexei Petrov was about to learn that the woman who'd helped him disappear had a daughter who'd learned to do the opposite. To make people remember, whether they wanted to or not. 6 months later, I was working at a different restaurant, not hiding, just living. It was smaller than the last place, Brooklyn, a neighborhood spot where regulars knew each other's names, and nobody needed a reservation 3 months in advance. The kind of place where power didn't announce itself, because real power didn't need to. I wasn't invisible anymore. I'd stopped trying. The owner knew my history. Not all of it. Just enough. He'd hired me anyway, with one condition. I worked the morning shift, when the clientele was mostly elderly couples and freelancers, who needed Wi-Fi more than discretion. "Mara," he'd said on my first day, "I don't care what you ran from. I care if you can make a cappuccino and treat people like they matter." I could do both. Rosa Petrov had woken up 3 days after I sent that message. I wasn't there. I heard about it secondhand, through channels I didn't entirely trust but couldn't entirely ignore. She'd been disoriented at first, then lucid, then quietly furious when she understood how much time had passed. She'd asked for her husband. They'd told her he was dead. She'd called them liars. And then, according to the nurse who'd been paid to tell me, she'd asked for the woman who'd signed the death certificate. My mother. When they told her my mother was gone, Rosa had cried. Not for herself. For whatever promise they'd made to each other in that hospice ward 23 years ago. I never met her. Never tried. Some debts don't require face-to-face payment. But I sent flowers to her room every week until she was discharged. White roses, no card. She knew who they were from. Alexei came for her 2 weeks after she woke up. Not with violence. Not with threats. Just a car outside the hospital, and a man who looked nothing like the photographs from before the fire. Scarred. Rebuilt. Recognizable only to someone who'd loved him before he became someone else. They left together. The Sokolovs had tried to stop them. Briefly. Half-heartedly. But by then, the file I'd released had already done its damage. The peace had fractured. Alliances had shifted. And the old lie that everyone had built their power on had crumbled into something messier, more honest, and far more dangerous. The old man, Salvatore, had survived. Barely. His empire had fractured along with the peace. Some of his people stayed loyal. Others saw opportunity in the chaos. He'd consolidated what he could and retreated into semi-retirement, the way aging lions do when the pride no longer needs them. I'd heard he'd asked about me once, whether I was safe, whether I blamed him. I'd sent back a single message through Vincenzo's people. I don't blame anyone for choices made before I was born. But I won't make them again. He hadn't responded. Vincenzo had survived too. 3 surgeries. 4 weeks in a private facility. 6 months of physical therapy he'd complained about in every text message he'd sent me. We didn't talk about love. We didn't talk about what might have been. We just talked. About books. About the weather. About nothing and everything, except the night that had nearly killed him. He'd visited once, 3 months after I'd started at the new restaurant. Sat at a corner table, ordered coffee he didn't drink. "You look different," he'd said. I cut my hair. That's not what I meant. I'd sat down across from him, breaking the rule about servers fraternizing with customers. "How's your father?" I'd asked. Bitter. Isolated. Blaming everyone except himself. Vincenzo had smiled, but it hadn't reached his eyes. "So, the same. And you?" "Free," he'd said. Mostly. I still think about you," he'd admitted. About what we could have been if we'd met in a different life. I'd reached across the table and touched his hand. "Just once." "We didn't," I'd said. "And I'm not sure different would have been better. Just easier." He'd nodded, understanding what I meant. We'd said goodbye like adults, like people who'd survived something together, and knew that survival didn't always mean staying. Now, 6 months later, I poured coffee for strangers, and listen to conversations that didn't involve death certificates or blood debts or promises made by people who were gone. I still wore my mother's medal, still thought about her every time someone called me by name. She'd been wrong about a lot of things, but she'd been right about one. Once you're seen, you can't unsee yourself. I'd stopped trying to disappear. Instead, I'd started showing up. To work. To therapy. To a life that was smaller than the one I'd imagined but more honest than the one I'd inherited. One morning, a woman came in alone, mid-50s. Elegant, wearing a scarf that looked expensive, and sunglasses that hid more than sunlight. She ordered tea, sat in the corner, watched me work. I felt her watching the way you feel a storm gathering. When I brought her tea, she spoke without looking at me. "You have your mother's hands." I set the cup down carefully. "You knew her. I knew her promise," the woman said, "and I know she broke it to save you." She pulled an envelope from her purse and placed it on the table. "Rosa asked me to give you this." I didn't touch it. "What is it?" "The truth your mother never told you," the woman said. "About why she taught you that word. About what she expected you to do with it." She stood, leaving money on the table. "She didn't teach you to survive, Mara," the woman said quietly. "She taught you to finish what she started." She left before I could ask what that meant. I stood there holding a tea tray, staring at an envelope I didn't want to open, and understood. My mother hadn't been protecting me. She'd been training me for what I'd just started to learn. But as I picked up the envelope and felt its weight in my hands, I knew one thing for certain. Being remembered wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of the one I'd have to write myself. And somewhere in the city, people who'd forgotten my name were about to learn it again, whether I wanted them to or not. What would you do if invisibility was the only thing keeping you alive, and the one thing you could never get back? Drop a comment below. I read every single one. And if this story made you feel something, anger, fear, recognition, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because some truths are too heavy to carry alone.